The recent history of humanity is full of tragedies caused by ourselves. Some were so striking that they became synonymous with disaster. Chernobyl, for example. In 1986, a nuclear reactor exploded in northern Ukraine and released a radioactive cloud that crossed borders. The city of Pripyat, built especially to house the plant's workers, became a ghost town in a matter of hours. 31 people died immediately. Thousands of cases of cancer were reported in the following years, and a legacy of abandonment that still chills those who see those images of schools, hospitals, and children's toys covered in dust. In Brazil in 1987, Goiânia was the scene of the largest urban radiological accident in history. Two scrap metal collectors found a shiny blue capsule in an abandoned radiotherapy device. Curious, they took the object home, and from there dozens of people had direct contact with cesium-137, an extremely radioactive material. 4 people died, including a 6-year-old girl. More than 120,000 people were examined, and an entire region of the city had to be isolated and demolished. But we cannot forget what happened in India. In 1984, one of the worst industrial disasters on the planet occurred. In Bhopal, during the early hours of the morning, a leak of methyl isocyanate, a toxic gas used in the production of pesticides, escaped from a Union Carbide factory. Without warning, a poisonous cloud covered the city while everyone slept. It is estimated that more than 15,000 people have died over the years, and more than 500,000 have been left with serious sequelae. To this day, survivors are fighting for justice. These disasters marked an era, made headlines around the world, and still inspire films, series, and documentaries. But there is another tragedy, just as deadly, that almost no one outside Australia knows about. A city that was not destroyed by explosion or radiation, but by an invisible dust, a poison that entered the lungs and poisoned entire generations. A place that the government itself tried to erase from history, a town where breathing the air was enough to sign your own death warrant. Its name is Wittenoom. And today, Bellomundo takes you on a journey to understand how an entire town was wiped from history, and how it all started with a decision that seemed harmless, but turned into a tragedy waiting to happen. Number 1. Location and general information. Before understanding how Wittenoom became synonymous with tragedy, we need to locate this almost forgotten spot on the map. The town was in Western Australia, a gigantic state that alone occupies almost a third of the entire Australian territory. More precisely, Wittenoom was born in the middle of the Pilbara Desert, one of the most remote and inhospitable regions in the country. Nearby is Karijini National Park, a place famous for its deep gorges. One of the best known is Hamersley Gorge, a narrow valley surrounded by red rock walls and natural pools that look like mirages in the middle of nowhere. It was in this setting of raw beauty and extreme isolation that the town began to take shape. The region is marked by intense contrasts. In summer, thermometers easily exceed 40 degrees Celsius. The air is dry, rain is rare, and the wind lifts clouds of red dust that cover everything. The landscape looks like something out of a painting: red earth, deep blue sky, and sparse vegetation that insists on surviving. It was in this forgotten corner of the world that a small community began to emerge. A beautiful place, yes, but completely isolated. And it is precisely this isolation that helps explain how a silent tragedy managed to spread for decades without anyone noticing. Number 2. How it all began. Wittenoom was not born like any other town. It did not grow gradually with a bakery, school, butcher shop, and people opening businesses. It emerged with a single purpose: to exploit a mineral that, at the time, seemed like an industrial revolution. It all began in the late 30s, when geologists found a substance called crocodolite on the slopes of the Hammersley Mountains in the heart of the Pilbara Desert. The name sounds harmless, almost too scientific. But in practice, we are talking about blue asbestos, the most dangerous type of asbestos that exists. At that time, asbestos was seen as an engineering miracle. It was cheap, heat-resistant, non-flammable, and had 1,001 uses. It was used to make roofs, thermal insulation, ceilings, water tanks, car brakes, and much more. For the industry at the time, it was almost like gold in fiber form. That's when the government and private companies saw an opportunity. And in the early 40s, the first draft of what would become Wittenoom emerged. First came the makeshift lodgings for the mine workers. Then came the wooden and zinc houses, the shops, the school, and even a church. By the 50s, the little town already looked promising. It had almost 1,000 inhabitants, workers, wives, children, and even immigrants who were looking for a new life. It was dust, jackhammers, trucks, and the noise of the mine all day long. To newcomers, it looked like a thriving community, growing rapidly in the middle of nowhere. But what no one saw, or chose not to see, was that the magic dust that made the town prosper was also slowly killing those who lived there. Number 3. Day-to-day life in the town. At that time, asbestos was a symbol of progress. It was the magic dust of modernity. And Wittenoom, with its mine in full swing, was proud to be part of it. To give you an idea, between the 50s and 60s, the city became Australia's sole supplier of crocodolite. That's right. All the blue asbestos used in the country and in many exported products came from there. And the pride was great. The residents saw themselves as part of something important. The work was hard, heavy, dusty, but it was what kept the city alive. Every day, the workers went down into the galleries and came back covered in a thin layer of shiny blue dust from head to toe. It was almost like deadly glitter, only no one knew it. Or if they did, they preferred not to think about it. Protective equipment? Practically none. At most, some tied a cloth around their faces, and the rest of the contamination happened at home. Wives washed those dusty clothes by hand, breathing the same toxic air. Children ran to hug their sweaty fathers from the mine, unaware that their affection came with thousands of killer fibers floating in the air. But the worst was yet to come. Mining waste, that toxic dust, was used to pave streets, backyards, schoolyards, and the backs of stores. The entire city was built on asbestos. Children played in the piles of dust as if it were sand in a playground. They slid, rolled, and made angel marks on the blue ground. Some even chewed the fibers pretending it was gum. It was fun, it was different, and it was absolutely lethal. Number 4. The lethal material. To understand the magnitude of the tragedy, we need to pause and explain something important. After all, what is so dangerous about asbestos? The term asbestos does not refer to a single mineral. In fact, it is a group of fibrous minerals with a very treacherous characteristic. Their fibers are so fine that they look like dust, but they are hard, sharp, and practically indestructible. And worse, when we breathe in this dust, it goes straight to the bottom of our lungs. The human body cannot get rid of these fibers. They remain there for decades, like microscopic splinters. The body even tries to heal around them, but this only makes the situation worse. Over time, this constant irritation can become a time bomb. The fibers cause diseases such as asbestosis, a type of fibrosis that hardens the lungs until they stop working, lung cancer, and the most lethal of all, mesothelioma. Mesothelioma is an aggressive cancer of the pleura, the membrane that surrounds the lungs. It almost exclusively appears in people exposed to asbestos. It's like a signature of the crime. And the cruelest detail, these diseases take 20, 30, or even 40 years to appear. It's as if the body carries a silent death sentence for decades. And the worst part, there is no safe dose, just a small amount of fiber in the air. A single contaminated breath is enough to start the process. There is no definitive cure. When mesothelioma appears, the outcome is usually quick and tragic. And among all types of asbestos, the most deadly is precisely the one that existed in Wittenoom, crocidolite, or blue asbestos. Its fibers are the thinnest, the sharpest, and the ones that most easily penetrate the lungs. Now put it all together. An entire town built on top of this material, trucks kicking up dust all day long, clothes covered with fibers, streets paved with toxic residue. It was only a matter of time before tragedy struck. And it did. Number 5. The first victims and denial. At first, it seemed like something simple. A young worker with shortness of breath, another with a cough that wouldn't go away. Someone else with chest pains that doctors quickly diagnosed as bronchitis, pneumonia, or simple fatigue. Medicine, rest, and life goes on. But the problem didn't go away. On the contrary, it only got worse. In the late 50s, the first serious warnings began to emerge. Half a dozen workers, all with less than 10 years in the mine, were diagnosed with asbestosis. Their lungs were becoming rigid inside, as if they were turning to stone. It was the body trying to defend itself from something it didn't know how to eliminate. Then, in 1959, came the first fatal blow. A miner died of mesothelioma, an extremely aggressive type of cancer in the pleura, the membrane surrounding the lungs. This cancer is so rare that it basically only appears in people exposed to asbestos. It was like a signature of the crime. This case should have set off all the alarms, but it didn't. Some doctors began to suspect something was wrong. They noticed the connection between the symptoms and the mining environment. But on the other side was an entire industry, a lucrative raw material, million-dollar contracts, jobs, taxes, government, and big business interests. The response was silence. Denial was the rule. Companies said there was no evidence. Authorities claimed to be monitoring the case. Meanwhile, more and more people fell ill in silence. And it wasn't just the miners. Wives, children, teachers, merchants, even those who had never set foot in the mine began to show the same symptoms. It was the dust in the air, on the ground, on clothes, at school, in backyards. Even so, Wittenoom continued to operate as if nothing was happening. Trucks driving around, jackhammers roaring, children playing in piles of blue dust. On the outside, the town seemed peaceful, but on the inside, tragedy was already running rampant. The bill was coming due. And what began with a handful of isolated cases would soon become the biggest environmental health crisis in Australian history. Number 6. The collapse of the industry and abandonment. Faced with so much suffering and evidence, it was no longer possible to pretend that everything was fine. The penny dropped, too late, as always happens in these stories. In the 70s, the Western Australian government began to admit, albeit timidly, that Wittenoom was a real problem. They suggested that residents leave, offered some compensation, but little came of it. It was only in the 80s and 90s that things got more serious. The state began to offer compensation to those who agreed to abandon everything and start a new life elsewhere. And many people agreed. After all, that place was already synonymous with disease, loss, and abandonment. But as always, there were those who resisted. A few people refused to leave, people who had lived there their entire lives, who had built houses, raised children, and seen their grandchildren born. And as absurd as it may seem, some of these people did not believe in the risks. The city dwindled. It went from over 1,000 residents at its peak to less than 10 in the early 2000s. It became a kind of ghost town that was still inhabited. A bizarre scenario. Then the government took drastic measures. In 2006, they cut off public services. No electricity, no mail, no ambulance, nothing. The following year, in 2007, Wittenoom was officially erased from the records. Literally wiped off the map. Updated maps of Australia no longer show the name of the town. The town was erased, as if it had never officially existed. But the rubble was still there. The ruins, the empty houses, the dust, and a few stubborn residents as well. The final solution came in 2019, when the government passed a law allowing the expropriation and expulsion of those who still insisted on living there. And that's what they did. They offered symbolic compensation because that land was now worthless and went door to door to remove the last survivors. The last resident was removed in 2022 against her will, but it was a matter of public health. With that, Wittenoom came to an end. Number 7. A toxic and forgotten legacy. Today, Wittenoom is officially a ghost town, and not only dead, it is being buried. In 2023, demolition began. Houses, warehouses, old structures, everything is coming down. The idea is to prevent adventurers from showing up there and to try to minimize the spread of contamination. But the problem is immense. Truly cleaning up Wittenoom is practically impossible. It is estimated that there are about 3 million tons of contaminated waste scattered throughout the valley. Mountains of blue dust, remnants of crocodolite, which have accumulated for decades on the slopes and in the gorges. The poisoned soil of Wittenoom covers about 50,000 hectares. To give you an idea, this represents almost a fifth of the Chernobyl exclusion zone in Ukraine. And the poison does not stay put. With every heavy rain, part of this dust runs off into the region's streams. With the wind, the lighter particles are carried for miles. Even traffic on nearby roads raises contaminated dust. Wittenoom asbestos continues to circulate in the environment, even though no one lives there. And those who suffer most from this are the Aboriginal peoples of the region. Many avoid certain areas of their ancestral lands because they believe that the spirit of death lives there, a symbolic way of referring to the contamination that haunts that territory. Experts warn that without extensive environmental decontamination, which would cost billions of dollars, the asbestos fibers will remain there for centuries. Meanwhile, responsibility continues to be shifted around. The government, companies, former shareholders. In reality, no one wants to foot the bill. Today, the town does not appear on maps, but the marks of tragedy remain there, in the soil, in the wind, and in the bodies of those who lived there. More than 2,000 people have died from diseases caused by Wittenoom asbestos. Hundreds more are still fighting against time, with fatal diagnoses and no chance of a cure. The case is little known outside Australia, but it raises a question that is relevant to the whole world. How many other Wittenooms are still out there, disguised as progress, waiting for the next tragedy to happen? It's a story that few people outside Australia know about, but one that serves as a warning to the whole world. What about you? Did you already know this story? Tell us here in the comments. And before you leave, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell so you don't miss any episodes of our Bello Mundo, and try using the new Hype video feature. It really helps the channel reach more people and continue bringing you unbelievable content like this.